Welcome to the Real Estate Mailbag. I'm Angie Lawless, and I'm here with my co-host, Brandon Miller. And Steve Morris, who is usually here with us, is absentee.
He may come in later.
He could come in later. But Wagon Wheel Title is a real estate title company, and we have 7 attorneys. We make our clients look like the stars that they are and provide our clients with a first-class experience. Here, we interview the best of the best in real estate and bring you tips, tricks, and stories to other agents and folks interested in real estate. If you have an idea for a future pod, discussion, or mailbag question, you can just email us at mailbag@wagonwheeltitle.com. With that, I'll say that we do have a little bit of different setup today. We're not going to do our normal sort of breakdown in sections because we have this wonderful panel who's going to talk to us about affordable housing, and we don't want to have those restrictions.
Today we have 3, what I would think fairly describe as leading thinkers and doers who are working to solve Nashville's affordable housing crisis, which I think is a fair way to characterize what we have. One new study has that we need 52,000 units by 2030. That is a lot of units, and it's going to take a lot of big thinking and innovative approaches to achieve that goal. Each of our panelists today brings a different perspective and has a sort of a different position within the affordable housing space. They will offer us, I think, a lot of insight on Nashville's built environment, trends, and maybe even a little bit about some of the hot legal issues, housing bonds. We'll get into some of those things.
Okay, so I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then I will let you guys fill in the gaps because these guys are super impressive. Okay, so Josh Haston, he is a graduate of Georgia Tech, Master's in City and Regional Planning program. Development manager currently with LDG Development's Nashville office. He oversees the development of new construction, multifamily, workforce, and affordable housing developments in Tennessee and Louisiana. LDG, his company, the company that he works for, has 25,000 units. And Josh has worked to entitle and secure financing for development of 1,694 affordable units so far and counting. He is a member of the IDB, which we will explain to you. They will explain to you what that is in a bit. And the Madison Rivergate Chamber, and a member of ULI. What I missed there, Josh?
I think you got it. The only other thing is really love Nashville, and I want to see us grow and blossom and be what we can be.
All right. Our second panelist here today is Andrea Prince. She is the current executive director of Rebuilding Together Nashville, which is an organization that's near and dear to me. I've been a board member for about to roll off it for 6 years, and the past board president. Andrea
Which Matt taught us is the best words in the English language.
The 3 best words in the English language: immediate past president. The exhale. Yeah. Your blood pressure goes down 20 points immediately.
And that is true. So Andrea's background, she has a master's in social work from Columbia University and with a focus on nonprofit management. She has been the executive director now for about a year and was the program director of RTN before that. Rebuilding Together Nashville is a nonprofit that connects neighborhoods to needed resources and that works to make critical, safe, and healthy home repairs to Nashville's residents. We've done about 74 homes since 2020 with an average project cost of about $25,000, and $1.6 million has given back to the community. She is also an active member and leader in the Alliance for Affordable Housing Nashville and the Nashville VOAD, which she can tell us a little bit about. If you want to say a word or two about some of those things that I'm missing.
Yeah, so, I am a longtime Tennessee resident, born and raised in the area. And so I think, like Josh, just wanting to see everybody get a chance to benefit from all of the good that's happening here in Nashville and seeing all the wonderful things that are coming Nashville's way and making sure that everybody has access to it.
Okay, so Matt, Matt's got like a resume that's about 10 pages long, so I just tried to put the most important things, which is he graduated from Hume Fogg. Which all of us who are in parenting age, including Matt, recognize what an accomplishment that actually is to get your child in there. It's free. Also, Dartmouth. And he is the president of Pathway Affordable Housing Corp and a senior vice president at Pathway Lending, a leading community development financial institution based in Nashville. In 2023, you guys might remember, he ran for mayor, finished third.
Spoiler alert, I am not the mayor. It did not work out. Actually worked out perfectly because now I get to be at Pathway, but.
I've asked him, like, do you miss the campaign trail? Do you miss it? He's like, I'm doing all right. Like, I'm resting a little. But there were 12 candidates, so he did all right. Prior to running for mayor, Wiltshire served as the Chief Strategy and Intergovernmental Affairs Officer for the Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency, the Public Housing Authority in Nashville. During the 3 years that Matt was at MDHA, the agency opened 6 new mixed-income affordable housing developments with more than 525 units and assisted the private sector in the development of another 3,500 units. Prior to joining MDHA, he served 8 years under 3 different mayors. That may be the biggest accomplishment on your resume, as the director of the Mayor's Office of Economic and Community Development. And I didn't put it in there, but we did quite well in that area as a city during that time. What was unemployment again?
2.0%. Lowest in the country.
Lowest in the country. Matt's worked in investment banking before that, venture capital for 15 years, San Francisco, New York, and Nashville. And he served as the president of Hands On Nashville and on the executive committee of the Center for Nonprofit Management and the Tennessee Justice Center.
What did we miss?
That's it. I'm married to Chrissy Wick. That's my biggest achievement, I would say, being married to Chrissy. But
6
the
kids?
other stuff is, and we have 6 kids between us. Yeah, a lot of kids.
All right, so we usually do a section we call Market Minute. We're going to keep that short. Big picture for our real estate professionals and listeners. The big theme has been interest rates. We're still kind of hovering in that 7% range. Downticked a little bit this week. I think a lot of lenders are right under 7. One of our lenders in the audience can probably give us some feedback about that. But that's been sort of the big thing. We've got some good economic reports showing that inflation is continuing to cool, and a lot of people are expecting Chairman Powell to hopefully lower rates a little bit in the next 3 months. That's the call.
Yeah, so just keep on hoping.
I'm taking the over on that. Jobs reports were strong today. I'm taking the over.
Yeah, this was written yesterday. So
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So we're going to start out with a kind of a baseline question. How do each of you define affordable housing?
I can start. So I would define it the way that HUD defines it, is that it's at least or no more than paying 30% of your income towards housing and utilities. But here in Nashville and through across most affordable housing programs, it is serving a resident that is making 80% AMI or below. AMI is area median income. So here in Nashville, for a family of 4, that is $85,520 a year. So LDG's typical tenant resident has 2.2 kids. So we're serving a lot of single moms that fit in that bracket. And there's a lot of need out there, about 72% of our workforce.
You guys have a better definition than HUD? No.
What he said.
Yeah. So I actually had a thought on the way in, and this is, it's ignorant, so I'll just come out from that bit. Sometimes I feel like we have a big heart for homelessness, and yet affordable housing on the flip side of it doesn't sound as sexy is not the right word, but it's not as like impassioned at times. And so I was trying to think about, does affordable housing include any sort of like group housing, or is it only about like individual households?
First of all, I love how your mind is always working. That's for both of you guys. I mean, this podcast, the books you've written, you guys are all, honestly like questioning things, and the innovativeness with your businesses reflects that as well. So not at all surprised that you were thinking of that on your drive in this morning. I think the only thing that I would add to that is a little bit of what Josh was saying, which is essentially affordable housing means different things to different people. And there's no one silver bullet. There's no one tool, to use the toolbox metaphor. I think we do need, great buildings that serve a family making $75,000 a year so that they can live in dignity. And we need housing options for individuals who are emerging from homelessness. And so it really is a fairly diverse issue, and the solutions, I think, are fairly diverse. It's allowing folks to stay in their homes. You were telling a great story. I hope you'll share with that in the podcast about how Rebuilding Together is allowing longtime homeowners to stay in their homes. That's part of it, as well as building new homes and preserving the affordable housing that we have. So the short answer to your question is yes, we're gonna need to do a lot of different things.
Who's doing the like, we're a homeless camp and I want to go live with you guys because it's better than living with that camp. Who does that kind of like put us all together in like a little group house? Is that done?
Yes, there's a handful of nonprofits out there that
done.
do that work here in Nashville. The first one that comes to mind is Open Table. Matt, you can probably think of more. So could you, Andrea. I mean, there's a ton of groups. And if they are interested, they should look at the Barnes Fund application round 14 that was just released on the 4th. There's an opportunity for funding there in terms of serving that population specifically.
Okay, good.
So there's a new project in East Nashville too called Samaritan House, which addresses not exactly that issue, but something.
It's addiction, right?
Addiction, yeah, kind of recovery, transition.
Okay, that project's really nice. I toured that. I don't know if you guys have been in there, but it's really good. Okay, so what drew you guys to this space? Like, what got you interested in it?
So I'll start.
Let's start with
I come from a social work background, and my whole mission is just to affect positive change with people. And housing is such a key component to people's health and well-being and safety that is really interesting and important to me as a professional and just as a person. I think in, my experience previously, I've, worked in all different kinds of environments, worked abroad in West Africa for a bit, came back here, and just seeing how home impacts people is huge, and that your community needs to take care of people, and that's kind of the messaging that I've seen, and what has really driven me in my work of being sure that everybody in our community is taken care of. And for us, as Rebuilding Together Nashville, we're working with older adults, with veterans, with disabilities. So it's people who need to be able to stay in their home. If they leave their home, where are they going to go? It's another form of displacement, and you'll have groups of older adults who won't be able to live their lives out in dignity. And so for me, that's really important to be able to make that individual impact while also trying to affect these larger social changes. We talk about generational wealth and the importance of being able to maintain your assets. Your home is typically the largest asset you have. So many of the homeowners we work with, especially in the Bordeaux community, Dickerson Pike Corridor, Bordeaux community, historically black community, where there was a lot of redlining that, that was the only choice where people had to go. And so now that things are changing, that everything's developing, everybody needs to benefit from all of these raised property values. And so being able to help with maintenance and ensuring that a value is maintained in a home is a really important piece of having an asset and being able to give that to the next generation.
And Andrea, just if some of our listeners don't understand, will you explain redlining?
Right. So, redlining was the process that kept, neighborhoods looking a certain way. You would essentially not allow certain groups of people to buy into certain areas. There's great work that's been done by Melody Fowler Green here in Nashville of talking about the impact of redlining on Nashville specifically. And so it really does, you can see how the economic disparities are still prevalent in those areas where only certain groups of people could buy into certain neighborhoods.
And I will add, I've seen her give an amazing presentation. I know that we kind of helped put on about redlining. And one of the big ideas, though, and this will interest, I think, everybody here, is that it's not just not buying, it's you can't get financing. So when we say not buying, it's not just because you're prohibited because of a certain race or class. It's also because no bank will loan you money because it's redline.
How about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, what drew me to affordable housing was actually right out of college. I taught high school for a couple years, and I realized in my teaching, I had 2 different courses of chemistry, and one course was performing drastically different than the other. Pull the addresses and realized the group that's performing poorly all lives in the same neighborhood, drove the neighborhood, and quickly realized, oh, that's why this class has a 70 grade point average. And just really wanted to make a bigger difference. I thought, as a naive 22-year-old at the time, that if Johnny and Susie's mom has a stable place to live, she can help make sure that they're doing their homework, that they're able to eliminate cycles of poverty, and overall make the community a better place. And I think there's tons of data out there that supports that.
So you really weren't that naive after all. I mean,
no, I just maybe a little bit. I thought it could happen quicker.
Yeah. Matt, what drew you here?
Yeah, I mean, the short version is this seemed like the next big mountain to climb, right? So I joined the mayor's office. Unemployment was over 8%. The city was really struggling. It felt like that was a way I could make an impact on the city that had done so much for me, and I was excited to go do that. And as you referenced, unemployment got down to 2%, but there were a whole bunch of other unintended consequences of that growth and development, and we saw the huge impact of affordability and all the things that Andrea and Josh had talked about, the impact it was having on families, and doing something to try and address affordable housing, concentration of poverty, felt like the next big mountain to climb. So, yeah, that's what brought me in.
So I want to get each of you to explain kind of what you do now, what your roles are for your different organizations.
Sure. Since I went,
start with you.
Okay. So, since I went last, I'll go first this time. So Pathway Affordable Housing Corp is actually a brand new organization. Didn't exist. Pathway itself is not. Shout out to Paul Hoffman, who's here, who's been with the organization for a long time. I won't date you specifically, but I will say Pathway is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with Pathway Lending, it is a nonprofit CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, which really just means it's a bank. But it's a bank that instead of getting its money from depositors who deposit the money and then the bank lends it and makes money off the loans, we receive our money from other banks who have obligations, as you all know, under the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, to do good things in their community. And many banks do great things in their community, but to fulfill a piece of their CRA obligations, many banks will choose to give some money or loan some money, more accurately, at favorable rates to organizations like Pathway, who then serve underserved communities. So we have a focus on lending to small businesses, energy efficiency loans, and affordable housing. So Pathway's been in the affordable housing business for a long time, and we have 3 sort of target markets: African-American-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and businesses that are located in low and moderate income census tracts, which just means communities that are have opportunities in them. And so that is Pathway is a bank. And if any of you small business owners are in affordable housing, we'd love to be your bank partner. Come talk to Pathway Lending. But in an effort to further serve affordable housing, Pathway started an initiative to go acquire NOAH, naturally occurring affordable housing, which just means affordable apartment communities. The ones that you guys have seen have frequently been acquired by market rate developers who go in, buy them, put in a couple $1 million of capital to paint and landscape, and then these are not Josh's people. These are other people but come in and inject a couple $1 million in an affordable property and then jack the rents up 40, 50, 60% and displace everyone. And we want to go in, buy those same apartment communities, still inject capital in improving the quality of the asset, but we have a commitment to keep them affordable in perpetuity. And we can do that because we have access to very cheap capital. You mentioned interest rates earlier. We can borrow cheaper than anyone else can borrow. Our equity has a lower expected return. And so because of the capital structure, we can do things that the market simply can't do.
So LDG primarily just does new construction, workforce, and affordable housing. We do market rates and mixed income housing as well, but our bread and butter tends to use a source of financing called the low income housing tax credit. It's a terrible name for the product, but that's just what it's called. And with my role at LDG, we are doing everything soup to nuts, from finding land by talking to brokers, working with politicians to get it properly entitled and rezoned, managing that design process, working with architects, engineers, and the permit office to make sure that we're not flooding anybody's property by grading the site a different way, which is very challenging with Nashville's topography. And then also working with lenders and other capital sources to make sure that the deal is properly financed to provide that affordable housing long term. What I'll say is, while LDG is a for-profit company, we are very much mission-based, and affordable housing is too difficult. And if we did not love the mission that we were doing, we would not do it. And so while we are a for-profit, we very much function like a nonprofit in how we invest and treat our community partners. So on a previous transaction, just to plug Rebuilding Together Nashville, we are long-term community partners, and we knew that one of our latest projects in Nashville was inevitably going to raise the property values and create that positive change that a lot of underinvested communities have. And so through the creative financing structures that we had in this transaction, we were able to donate $100,000 to Rebuilding Together Nashville so they can also then preserve that long-term affordability for their own seniors that they serve in the community, so that there's, again, folks able to take part and benefit from the long-time preservation of that affordable housing that everybody needs access to.
And we just want to say thank you super much for that, LDG, for the RTN. Tell us a little bit too about how that came about. I know there's some there was some politics involved with it as far as kind of coming up with the idea, the proposal. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah. Real quick I mean, I think it's like 70% of Nashville is zoned single family. That's crazy because that means that we're adding on practically a year to the entitlement process. And when we're talking about carry cost of land, that adds up quick. Something like 46% of a development's cost is tied to regulations. And if we had more affordable zoning, this wouldn't be as much of an issue. But going back to where that happened, we were trying to rezone some property. And again, we noticed that our redevelopment was going to have an impact, and making sure that we are community partners with the community. We don't want to be developers that are forcing development on a community. It's development with the community. And so in that mindset, we wanted to work with organizations. And in that process of the rezoning, Councilmember Toombs and Councilmember Gamble introduced us to, at the time, Caitlin Daskew, now Andrea's position, in terms of working up to set that donation policy and process.
And I will say, to look at that for other developers as well, because you're going to have a friendlier reception if you're helping the people who already live there. And so if you want to have some of those barriers removed to zoning, really engaging the community in the process and giving them something in return is helpful. So everybody benefits. For Rebuilding Together Nashville, we've been hard at work in the Bordeaux community since 2020. We take this targeted community approach where we focus our resources in one area at a time. Now at this point, though, we're at 2 areas. We're Dickerson Pike Corridor in the Bordeaux area, really looking to make that huge impact in one neighborhood. So in Bordeaux alone, we've repaired 65 homes, $1.5 million invested. What that means is it's 108 people who have been served by us, who remain in their homes, who are able to stay safe and healthy in their homes. And so, I am really proud of the work we get to do. I lead an incredible team who is just so dedicated to people and making sure that everybody gets the repairs that they need. One of the other big pieces that I'm really proud of for Rebuilding Together is that we've been really intentional of working with communities so that we can see those other gaps in resources. Our projects will typically last about 3 months. When we go inside someone's house, they might not have food in their fridge. Well, if you don't have food in your fridge, you also can't stay safe and healthy in your home. And so thinking through, how can we connect people to those other resources? We're professionals in building, we do construction, but there's other people who do food. So let's get them to the food people. So really building those resources and networks, and especially in communities like Bordeaux that have, felt left out in a lot of areas, over time, have been promised a lot of things and maybe have not seen them come to fruition, of being able to bring those partners there. One of the great things we were able to do this spring was host our first community resource fair, and it was developed with the community. We have a community advisory committee that worked with Vanderbilt nursing students throughout the whole process of planning. And what resulted was a great day that had vendors there that were geared towards the community. We had Black Mental Health Village, the store, Nashville Food Project, Age Well, the TSU nutrition program, Operation Hope, providing financial literacy. So it really did, we kind of surveyed what needed to happen, and then we made it happen. And so not only home repairs, but we're going further than that. So really proud of the work that Rebuilding Together is doing right now.
Just really want to plug them again. Every developer in Nashville, as well as every council member, should know Rebuilding Together Nashville and the work that they're doing to preserve housing. That is the cheapest way to tackle our crisis, is helping to make sure that folks stay in their homes and stay in Nashville. So just everyone should talk to them. Plugging Anton out there in the crowd.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing, and this is just like we don't want to get into the complications of zoning yet, but step one for a rezone in Davidson County is you've got to get your Metro Council person to support it. That is step one. If that's not happen, you're toast. So that's why the council is so important, council people are so important, and why political engagement with your council member is so important.
Yes, and so speaking of council, and something that we want to make sure that they're aware of and are learning about, recently in this past legislative session, Representative Caleb Hemmer and Senator Charlene Oliver, in conjunction with Matt Wiltshire, they passed a bill that was just signed into law on May 29th by Governor Lee. The law allows for the creation of affordable housing options by enabling local governments in communities around the state to issue bonds through industrial development boards, IDBs. The funds can then be used in partnership with private sector to create and sustain affordable and workforce housing projects. Matt, what did I just say?
Hell if I know. So thank you. Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this legislation. It was, I think it really speaks to how broad of an issue this is in our state, that a bill that was carried by a Democratic representative from Nashville and a Democratic state senator from Nashville passed with the overwhelming majorities in a Republican-controlled Senate and House. So
also,
really
like in the General Assembly, if you guys don't know, there's also sort of a city versus country vibe. So
Right.
I think not only do we have Democrat, but we also have all Nashville. So even more impressive.
More than a vibe.
yeah. But I think it really does speak to. I mean, look, some of the parts of our state that are facing big affordable housing challenges include the Jackson area, right? Blue Oval is going to create massive demand for housing, not just in Jackson, but in the more rural communities around it. I mean, this is an issue that our entire state is facing in different ways. But it is different in different places. So what this legislation does, and actually I'm a big believer in not recreating the wheel. And so this effort that I'm doing at Pathway Lending is really modeled in a large part off something that's being done in Charlotte, North Carolina with their Housing Impact Fund and Ascent Housing. Shout out to Mark Etheridge there and Erskine Bowles and Nelson Schwab. A really interesting model. And a piece of the secret sauce that they've created there is that the city of Charlotte will make low interest loans for you finance nerds, the mezzanine debt. So you've got senior debt, which is your most senior capital. Then there's mezzanine debt, which is more expensive, but not as expensive as your equity, which is the three pieces of a typical capital stack. But in Charlotte, they have now done about a dozen affordable bond issuances over the last 20 years. They've now, I think, raised a couple $100 million of issuing bonds by the city and then using the proceeds to do a variety of different things, including it could be gap financing on LIHTC deals like what LDG does, or providing assistance to home repair for seniors like what Rebuilding Together Nashville does. So, but the simple fact is that in Tennessee, it was not allowed under state law for communities to issue bonds and use the proceeds to support affordable housing. We can do it to build a stadium. We can do it for economic development deals, but we couldn't do it for affordable housing. And so what Representatives Hemmer and Senator Oliver did was pass legislation to put that tool in the toolbox. And this is where we are now speaking to you, council members. We hope that at some point the administration and the council will choose to pull that tool out of the toolbox. And just the one other piece, since Josh sits on the IDB, one of the ways that the Sports Authority can do bonds to support a private development like a stadium is that it's not the city issuing the bonds, it's the Sports Authority. So in this case, similarly, it's not the city issuing the bonds, it's the Industrial Development Board would be technically the body to issue the bonds. But unfortunately, the IDB doesn't have any money. They don't have any revenue. They have no way to pay back those bonds. And so the city's role is providing credit support, meaning whatever your cost, will cover that. And so if the IDB issues $10 million worth of bonds, they probably have to pay bondholders something like $700,000 a year for 20 years, right? Including principal and interest. They've got to pay $14 million to pay back the $10 million they borrowed, $700,000 a year over 20 years. So where are they going to get $700,000 a year from? Well, if they then turn around and loaned me all the money at Pathway Lending at favorable rates, I might pay them 2% interest. This is the model in Charlotte. So I'm paying them $200,000 a year. So they're paying out $700,000 and they're getting in $200,000. The city would cover the balance of that in this example. And the city would say, yep, we're going to cover the $500,000. And we're doing that because folks like Pathway are doing something that's really important for our city, which is stopping displacement, preventing folks from getting kicked out of their homes, maintaining a diversity of affordability and income-aligned housing in gentrifying, improving neighborhoods. And so the specifics of all of that will need to be worked out. What are the things that the city cares about? What are the things that the city wants to invest in? What are the deals that they would support doing and the deals they would not support doing? Does it need to be on transit? Does it need to have environmental standards? These are all the policy specifics that will need to be worked out. But what Caleb and Charlene did was put that tool in the toolbox, and now it's up to the city to decide how they want to pull it out and what they want to use it for.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that just a little bit is to say that from a developer's perspective, we need so much housing. We need 52,000 units by 2030. In the frothiest days of the market, we are producing through the LIHTC pilot about 1,800 units a year.
Yeah, so like we were just talking about this, but what they're calling the IDA, the initial 30 acres of the 130 acres that Metro owns that they're developing on, they're going to get about 1,550-ish residential units, and of that, about 45% will be affordable, so 700. So when he's talking about 52,000 units, and you're thinking about 30 acres on the East Bank where we've prioritized 45% for affordable, which sounds great, it's still only 700 units.
All these tools that we are working to create at the IDB, as well as in partnership, especially with the city, is to try to figure out how we can get more folks involved to help address the issue. So as much as LDG would love to build 52,000 units, there is no way that LDG can build 52,000 units, nor could the existing pipeline of Holiday Ventures and Elmington and Dominium and you name it. There's a handful of developers that have built the majority of affordable housing the past decade in Nashville, and there's just way more need than we can actually build. So it's important for us as a city to make sure that we are building tools that are attracting more development that can do this. So if we're incentivizing Tony Giarratana to build a high-rise, he needs to be successful because other people are going to follow in his footsteps, and maybe all these other developers are also going to want to come to Nashville to use our tools, because the absorption for an affordable housing development is through the roof. We can, in fact, LDG has a property right now that doesn't have its last certificate of occupancy. It's 100% leased. 100%. Ask any market rate developer right now what their occupancy is for a new construction project.
Yeah, because right now we can tell you that we've got 3 big projects that have just flipped because of the current leasing occupancy rates.
12-13% vacancy, and a lot of that kind of, a lot of the apartments we have are kind of luxury, upper end. They're not serving the affordable space at all.
So they flipped to condos because they're not being leased. So what Josh is saying is that for developers to understand that you can make similar returns if you're being able to occupy these spaces as quickly, as if you get more money, but you've got a lower occupancy and a longer lag time to get there.
Exactly. You can do good and do well, and by doing good, you're helping the community. We would love to be building mixed income housing in every property. Right now, there's just not enough tools to do that. And so this has the potential to be a tool for every developer, whether you're doing adaptive reuse like Matt's looking to do at Pathway, or whether you're a merchant developer that's looking to just sell to some insurance company upon lease up. You can do this, and Nashville has the opportunity, being in the spotlight, to attract more developers that are also creative in helping us address our own issues.
So we talked about this new bill that's been passed by the state would potentially make eligibility for 14 cities that qualify under the current rules. So kind of tell us, using your kind of thought experiment hat, let's assume that Nashville figures out we're going to adopt this. We're going to say we're going to take advantage of this new law. We're going to empower the IDB. What does that look like? And how can people that are, whether they're real estate developers, professionals, what can we do with that if it's implemented kind of to the max?
The short answer to your question is it's pretty unlimited, because again, the tool itself just says, hey, city, and to your point, Brandon, I should add, you guys probably have a statewide audience here. This bill didn't apply just to Nashville. The comptroller stepped in and said, look, not every IDB in the entire state can do this, because there's some communities that I guess the comptroller was concerned weren't sophisticated enough and might get taken advantage of. So you have to have a AA bond rating. And to your point, there are 14 communities across the state that meet the requirements that the comptroller has set to do this kind of thing. It's all the big cities, though, right? It's Chattanooga and Knoxville and Nashville, and 14 of them across the state. So, but you asked how could folks take advantage of this? The next step is for the Metro Council and the mayor's office to decide what they want to do. we represent up here on the dais 3 examples with our organizations of how these funds could be used, but there are others. And really what I would challenge your audience to think about is, and this is when I served in the mayor's office in economic and community development, this is how I thought about it. So Josh's investors expect a return, right? The folks who lend him money expect to get their money back without much risk. And the folks who give him equity, are expecting greater returns. Merchant developers may be a better way to talk about that. But folks who provide capital are looking for a return. The city thinks about this in the same way. If the city's going to put money into affordable housing, what's the city's return and what's the return on that investment? In other words, how many dollars per unit, or what are they doing with the money? It's sort of the same thing. The city already issues bonds. Nancy Van Rees knows this well. She voted on it for 8 years, and thank you for your service to our community. But the city issues every year between $250, $500 million of bonds to do things like buy land for parks, pave roads, build schools, build sidewalks. The city isn't looking for a financial return on that investment. It's not like, oh, I want a 22% IRR on that new sidewalk. But it's saying, hey, look, for $1 million, it's worth us connecting this school to this neighborhood. That's the city's return on that investment. Similarly, as the council and the administration are looking to craft this policy, hey, we're going to go issue $50 million of affordable housing bonds. And for that $50 million, here's what we want to get out of it. And again, it could be making it a little bit easier to do LIHTC developments. It could be preserving another 100 homes in the Bordeaux community or in another community. Hey, we want to help you expand to this next neighborhood. Or it could be, hey, Matt, we expect you to go preserve 500 units of a housing that's affordable today, but that's at risk of becoming the next out-of-state developer's 20% IRR deal. So that's not a great answer to your question because it really is unlimited, and that's one of the attractive things about it.
And part of what makes it attractive, again, just not to just beat a dead horse, but we really want to beat a dead horse, is that if you're using the city's credit rating, we're borrowing. I looked at our last bond issuance, the GO Series 2022 A and B. Both of those borrowed at around 3.4%. You can do a lot of creative stuff if you're borrowing at 3.4%. Just laying that out there for all the developers that can plug that number into their model.
And I would like to plug again preservation of and encouraging council members. If you are able to preserve housing, you're helping residents who already live here. How that does help you politically. You're putting direct money back into neighborhoods for the people and the constituents that you represent. And so I think being able to also encourage more preservation activities to happen. Right now, we're like one of 3 people in the city doing it. We get over 300 calls a year of people needing help. Like, there's a bigger need, and more people need to be able to get into the business and do it, to be able to do those home repairs and to keep people in their homes.
So, I guess I would say, how can the real estate community here help affordable housing? Like, what are things that they can be doing? Josh.
Sure.
I pick you.
I mean, there's tons of things. That what we've kind of talked about so far is preservation of single-family home ownership, but also rental, both preservation and new construction. But affordable housing is more than just that. I think if the majority of this audience, I think, is probably realtors in terms of listening to this podcast, you should talk to Marshall Crawford. For all the 20 to 50 unit townhome deals that are being built right now, which there are a lot if you look at the Planning Commission, there's no reason why you can't have a handful of those properties of those 50 units be affordable housing. Marshall has programs that can make sure that there's shared equity models to build in that affordable home ownership. There are other ways you can advocate in terms of just educating the constituents in your own neighborhood in terms of how affordable housing benefits you. Like if we just had better zoning, take the bid rent on land down, you can do a lot more creative stuff. So I'm rambling here. There's a ton of ways that we can support affordable housing, both on the single family as well as multifamily.
Well, and I'll say, I mean, you know, for realtors especially, and when it comes to preservation and home repairs, it's just going to help the whole neighborhood and also your ability to sell a home if all the homes on the street are upkept. You know, you don't want to be trying to sell a $700,000 home next to a home whose roof is in disrepair, or there's, you know, the brush is grown up around the home. So like being able to maintain that curb appeal is just going to have an impact on your ability to sell properties. It also, you know, will invest back into the neighborhood to where people will want to live in that neighborhood. They'll want to buy more homes in that neighborhood. So thinking of that, and then of course, just my plug, you can donate. And then you're helping to really, you know, directly impact and, you know, repair homes in the communities where you're selling them.
Oh, Richard Courtney just taught me that you don't say donate, you say contribute. So you can contribute.
Well, and I usually say invest, because you're investing in the community when you're, you know, supporting Rebuilding Together.
Since we're in real estate, you can't say real estate in Nashville without mentioning Richard in some way anyway. So, yeah. Well, okay. So what's the current, and Matt, if you have any thoughts on that last question, feel free to chime in on that with this one as well. But what's Nashville's current administration doing about affordable housing currently? You know, we know that the state's opened up this path, so we hope that Nashville's going to grab this tool. But what are they doing currently, and what are the LIHTC? What else is there, and what are some other options that they maybe could be thinking about?
Not to give Nancy PTSD, but we're in budget season. And those of you who follow Metro closely know that we have a June 30 fiscal year end, and the council's responsible for passing the fiscal year 25 budget by the end of this month. That budget proposed by the mayor includes $30 million for the Barnes Fund. Barnes Fund has been an overwhelming success and has done a lot of great things in the community. And so that $30 million commitment was one that Mayor O'Connell made on the campaign trail, and he's honored that. So I'd say that's the first and most significant thing that they're doing. I think, I certainly wouldn't speak for the administration, but I think they would say that the transit plan is very much a part of affordability. And well, I mean, Freddie has said that. Mayor O'Connell has said this is part of affordability, is helping you get around the city. So I'd say that would be the second big commitment they've made. We do think that there are opportunities to more explicitly tie those things together. And so I do hope that as we do lay down transit, you've seen in communities across the country where transit goes, that the people who are opposed to transit are like, oh, I don't want those people coming to my neighborhoods. But the reverse is actually the true. When you lay transit down, the prices of real estate along those transit corridors outpaces the growth of the community overall. It is demonstrably a good thing, which is great if you own property there, not so great if you're a renter, because your rent's likely to go up and you're likely to get displaced. And so it would be my hope that we could work explicitly with the administration to institute some opportunities to preserve some of the affordable housing that's there, because then that would allow folks to take advantage of transit to get to jobs without getting kicked out and kicked further out, which is what I fear could happen if we aren't more intentional about it.
And just a plug for transit, Brandon and I on our Climbing the Charts podcast just interviewed Michael Briggs. It isn't out yet, but he's working on transportation in the administration. He's on loan from Vanderbilt, and he knows a ridiculous amount about maps and roads and flows of traffic. But in that conversation, you know, I challenged our listeners, and I just want to challenge everybody here and listening today. If you're thinking about voting negatively on the transit plan, you should not be allowed, this is my opinion, you should not be allowed to do that until you have taken the bus to an essential service. Go get some groceries. I encourage you guys to, if you're in town, go to Walmart on Powell Avenue on the bus. Find your nearest bus stop. Go there, and then you will leave there with your groceries, and you will walk across 4 lanes, I think, of traffic that's kind of in a V section where you feel like you're playing Frogger, and you will go stand on the side of a hill without a shelter with your bags, and you will wait maybe 30 minutes for the bus. And if it's a nice day, excellent. If it's not, it's all the same. So that's like, I'm super passionate about that. So I just want to challenge everybody here today. If you're thinking along the lines of, no, we don't need this, just try that and think about these people who also, you know, we have a duty to take care of all of our people. And so try it.
Just to say a couple other things about the transit plan. It's a great plan. You're all going to benefit from it in terms of, even if you never take transit in your life, 2/3 of our stoplights are going to be smart stoplights. That means that you're no longer going to be sitting at a stoplight with no one coming. That's massive. So just think about your commute there. But also for affordable housing advocates, there's also money in the existing plan as proposed to buy land for these affordable housing components tied to transit. And if you look at the plan close enough, there's about 10 used transit stops, major transit stops that the plan is proposing, that I think there are opportunities to partner with the landowners and the city through some of these programs we're talking about, or also even coming to the IDB to figure out how you can do both. Again, do good and do well, especially if you need rezoning.
And I'll kind of add to that too, of trying again with, just like with affordable housing, transit's not for quote unquote poor people. Like, transit's great. If you've ever been to a big city and you get to ride transit and get around, that's wonderful. Housing affordability is not for quote unquote poor people. Like, if you can afford to, you know, pay your mortgage and go on vacation, doesn't that feel great? Like, it's for everybody. And so it's not like this is for those people, it's for everybody, and we'll all benefit from it. And wouldn't it be cool if you could get downtown so easy?
Well, and to just plug that, you know, this is about a $3 billion plan, is that right? And so when former Mayor Berry had her plan that ultimately went to the referendum under former Mayor Briley, that was like a $9 billion plan. A lot of this stuff was in that plan before, but it is it's the base. So what we're doing here is taking a little bite at the apple, testing it out, seeing how it goes, so that it's not such a sticker shock and such a kind of this big thought process. So this is where we're starting.
Kind of piggyback too for something that Josh said. When Michael Briggs was explaining, especially like just the technology upgrades to the transit grid, he said a good analogy is think about like 1990s AOL dial-up. That's basically our traffic signals and our stoplights, and this is basically like Google Fiber. That's going to be the change. And that's just a piece of it.
Well, and not just that, but he said, you know, when we have an issue, you often are having to call police officers, fire department, other emergency personnel to go out to the traffic stop to push buttons to fix it. So if you think about the cost and the other opportunity cost of what those personnel could be doing to help our city, it's too high. Whereas under this system, you know, somebody in a control room can push some buttons and fix it, and we actually get to move forward.
Did want to talk a little bit about the zoning proposal. Zoning is a very big issue, and we had an article we had sent around about the Tokyo zoning, which is super interesting. I encourage everybody to Google New York Times Tokyo affordable living. So it's a great article. But, you know, last year, Metro Council member Quinn Evans Siegel, who's vice chair of the IDB board that we've been talking about, proposed a bill to upzone many parcels in Davidson County. Many believe that promoting more density through zoning is how we best move the needle on affordable housing. This bill so far has been met with, I think it's fair to say, a lot of resistance. I think there's been a lot of, you know, neighborhood pushback, especially in parts of West Nashville, West Meade, Oak Hill. what do you all think about, upzoning at least parts of the city? And if that is something that is a good idea, how can it be sold where people don't just think this is going to devalue my house in Oak Hill?
I've talked so much on this podcast, Brandon. I should really just sit this one out. Punt. No, I mean, look, I'll just say this. It is a super sensitive issue. And I think there are a lot of folks who have a lot of questions. I heard even from some developers who thought that the particular pieces of the Nest legislation wouldn't actually move the needle. I will say I didn't look into it enough to be an expert on it. I certainly understand the motivation for it. There's some other communities. I think Canada has pushed quadplexes pretty aggressively. But it's really sensitive, right? Folks buy into neighborhoods because they like that neighborhood in many cases. And so when there's something that happens that could cause that neighborhood to change, whether it's a new development or a massive change in zoning, that gets people pretty freaked out. And so when you're going to do that, you need to have long, extensive conversations, and that is a brutal process. And you run into this particular issue that we've talked about, which is the thing that is good for all of us may have a little bit of benefit for everyone, may have some negative for one person, and that person views it as so negatively that they are super fired up to take action. And all of us who get a little bit of a benefit, it's not worth getting up off the couch on a Tuesday night to go get for that little benefit. And so there's just this fundamental dynamic that on things like broad changes in zoning, there are fundamental issues to it. And so I think what the council learned, and I'd defer to them, but I think what they learned is this kind of thing takes a lot of time, a lot of conversation. I think a lot of the fears that folks had, honestly, were misplaced, but understandable. And so in situations like that, you got to spend a lot of time educating a lot of people. And sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze, and other times it's not.
Sounds very similar to transit. I know, like many cities that have passed transit, it's usually taken 2 or 3 big efforts that have failed before the pain point becomes so acute that finally passes. And I do feels like so far the atmospherics around this transit proposal feels good. I mean, most of the people we're talking to, we don't have certain opposition that we had in 2018, so we'll see. Fingers crossed.
I mean, Matt used a key word that I think needs to be talked about, and that's fear. I think a lot of folks, it's not necessarily fear of change so much as fear of loss and loss of what they think may happen. And so just communicating that and realizing and honestly humanizing that perspective, I think is going to go a long way. What I would also say is you can just ask a few simple questions like, do you want your kids to live here? Your kids, unless you buy them their first house, they're not going to be able to afford to buy a home. And so I think it's just communicating in ways that people understand. A lot of folks don't understand AMIs. A lot of folks don't understand, frankly, what interest rates do to the cost of housing and housing affordability. And I think it's, again, humanizing housing. We've got, as a country, not just Nashville, figure out how to talk about tough issues and, humanize it.
Well, and I think, one of the things I heard was at the Neighbor to Neighbor conference earlier in the year and hearing people, residents talk about it. It's that fear, but it's also that well, what about me? And so, what is the benefit for somebody who already owns a home, who can afford to live in that neighborhood? What is the benefit to them, to having, new development happen? And so, again, that's my plug for home repairs, because if we can then also invest in the community of people who are already there, then they're not worried about, well, why is this development happening and I can't afford to fix my roof, or my windows are drafty and I can't repair them, but now here's this beautiful new building next to me. But if we can, again, take care of everybody, then it helps us all. And it's trying to really bring down that level of fear of, we can't help everybody, that there's not enough. Like, there's enough for everybody. We just have to direct the resources there.
Yeah, and I think other things just to think about is like Midtown from 40 to Vanderbilt was upzoned in like 2008, 2009, mass upzone. It's just now starting to be built on. So in terms of thinking about, oh my gosh, this is going to change my neighborhood tomorrow, that's just a fallacy. And just understanding that everything in real estate takes time, and change is gradual. It happens as a city no matter what. But again, communicating and understanding and humanizing housing.
And I think what you said earlier, Josh, was that about 70% of Davidson County is zoned single family. That's a stat that's pretty amazing to me. For our listeners, one thing Matt said earlier was that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So he's looking at how this similar program that Tennessee has just embraced was done in Charlotte, similar in the U.S. And we talked about, Tokyo is a kind of a unique experiment in upzoning, but in the U.S., like Minneapolis is too. So it's another kind of case study in, what's happened in Minneapolis since they upzoned basically the whole city 3 or 4 years ago. It's not been a negative. It's been a pretty great story, and I think you are right that these things, when you see a law change or a zoning change, it takes 10, 20 years to really see that unfold. It's not like you flip a switch and all of a sudden your property value has collapsed. So, okay, to kind of bring this down here, give us each a couple sentences about where our listeners can go to learn more about each of your organizations. And if you have anything else, we haven't already talked about that you think is worth mentioning, kind of share that with us.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Rebuilding Together Nashville, you can go to www.rtnashville.org. We're also on social media, RT Nashville 615. And if you pick up a phone, you could call us 615-297-3955. I don't think people do that now.
You can find us at ldgdevelopment.com. Plain and simple, but you can also reach out to me at jhaston@ldgdevelopment.com. It's my LDG email, as you might figure. Similar plug, if you are a land seller, a church, an institution, if you are looking to figure out how to jump into the affordable housing space, we are always looking for land and figuring out how we can work together and partner with the community.
So if you want to find out more, go to pathwayhousing.com, pathwayhousing.com. So pathwayhousing.com, or to learn more about Pathway Lending and the great products that they have for small businesses or energy efficiency as well as affordable housing, go to pathwaylending.org, or, just Google it.
All right. Last question. We always like to ask each of our guests, who should we do this next? Who's one person you would recommend that you think would offer something unique and worth listening to for our listeners?
You just talked about it, so there may be some recency bias in my response. I think having Quinn, Representative or Councilmember Siegel, but also maybe someone who was opposed to that, but to come on and have a respectful conversation about it, I think would be super fascinating, particularly for your audience of realtors. It's a complex issue, and I think coming in and talking about it and having a conversation about that in particular would be interesting. I think there is a really interesting debate about historical zoning overlays, the pluses and minuses of that. So the whole zoning discussion is one that I think we really need to lean into as a city. I'd go in that direction, and then Marshall Crawford to talk about the community land trust, or others. If you haven't had some folks to talk about community land trusts and the benefits of those, I think are a couple interesting conversations to have.
I think there's a handful of things you could talk about. I think if we're going to talk about zoning or new legislation, I think Councilmember Berkeley Allen would also be a great one to have on. I think it would be important to hear from, as we're talking about future legislation, of how we can craft this IDB stuff. It's not just, again, the folks at this table. I think it's understanding and hearing from the merchant developers that what they need or want to see in a program to figure out how we can bolster that involvement, to make sure that whatever legislation we do craft is crafted thoughtfully as well as functionally, because bad policy begets bad results. So again, the top 10 national developers are already here. Have one of them on.
And I mean, I guess I would say, I think one, Berkeley would be great. But if you're talking really about zoning, I think someone who is a community leader and someone who lives in the neighborhoods would be a really important voice to hear, and to be able to hear that other side of why neighborhoods are resistant to it could be really impactful. So I won't put any one person on the spot.
Just to say, shout out to Berkeley too, who's also an RTN board member. So she's great. I think that's basically a wrap. Thanks everybody for coming out. This has been, I think, a super interesting, informative conversation. If anybody does have ideas for future episodes or mailbag questions, send us an email at mailbag@wagonwheeltitle.com. Thanks again for everybody being here, for everybody that's listening. And after we go off live, just kind of remind everybody about parking. If you parked in the garage, there's a little ticket you get. They will validate that at the front desk. And after we kind of go off air here, we will also give a few minutes for questions if anybody has any questions.